with anything anyone would like to share or talk about or ask, please feel free.
Hey, Mike. I just recently finished Joseph Sturgeon's first book and saw something in it, and I'm not sure if I misunderstood him or so I just want to bounce it off of you. But he talked about that being in heaven, that there were levels in heaven in terms of what your relationship with the Lord was here determines the level of how close you are to him there. And so he made the point about that people that have, quote unquote, like a deathbed experience, they're sort of like the furthest away, as opposed to someone like Enoch, who's much closer. What I didn't hear him say, and maybe I misread into it, was that I didn't hear him say there was like, hey, this is like a starting point. Like if you had the deathbed conversion, you would start here, but you worked your way up. Maybe I misinterpreted that wherever you wound up in heaven, that's where you were always going to be, which really, and I've never seen that before, but I sort of thought, well, that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. So I thought I'd just bounce that off of you. I've never seen that. And I just wondered if you've ever experienced anything like that or had anything to add to it.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. My personal experience is that levels of responsibility increase with levels of maturity, levels of holiness, purification, refining. So God doesn't entrust us stuff that we can't handle in relation to our character and those things. So there is a process of lordship, kingship, sonship, which is an increase. Those that go into that realm, let's say with a deathbed experience, they are not penalized, but they do start from not knowing an awful lot, and therefore there is some training, equipping needed to bring them into their role in sonship, which may be different from other people's roles in sonship because of that nature. But there is, of course, where we have outworked things here, that when we engage there, there is this outworking in heaven and on earth, and I understand that. But there's a difference between relationship and responsibility. And God does not keep anyone at arm's length. You know, he wants intimacy face to face with everybody, and he is doing everything he can to enable us to come into that. And of course, that does affect us here, because you can't separate one from the other. But we should be living in both realms at the same time. So both realms should be connected and flowing and interacting. You know, we're a gateway of heaven into the earth. We can live in the dual realms of heaven. What we're doing there affects us here because our spirit is engaging there. Our soul comes into agreement with that. But there are also lots of things obviously in the way of that. So there is a process of maturing, transformation, coming into the reality that is ours, that we're not necessarily living in. It's not automatic. That doesn't mean God loves anyone any less or more. It just means that people's ability to engage God in that love is different because of their own belief systems and things that are affecting that, hindering, blocking, affecting the fact of experiencing the fullness of who God is. And those who do not experience that here are not penalized when they get into that realm. They are welcomed into an intimate relationship with God. But of course, they also have to go through the process of soul transformation there. It's not automatic. Suddenly we're in heaven and everything's fine. It isn't. But actually that atmosphere obviously is much easier to go through that process than having to face going through that process with all the things that are going on here and all the negatives and everything else. But there's still a refining, purification process. The altar in heaven is still there, you know, in the temple for people who engage there, and all those who engage after death and are then rescued out of the fire and brought into a relationship with God also go through that process. And anyone who's part of the Men in White Linen, it isn't automatic. There are different roles and responsibilities, and there is a maturing process that goes on. So I don't believe in a outer court, inner court, holy of holies, and everyone's stuck there for eternity. Because I don't believe in eternity in that sense anyway, because there are ages to come in which roles will change and increase as things develop, and it isn't fixed and rigid. It's an ongoing developing thing. So everybody has the opportunity of continually pursuing intimacy, relationship, and therefore greater levels of responsibility as we go through that. And we can do that here and there, and they can do that there. It isn't, I don't think any of it's fixed.
And it's possible that I misread it. It's just that when I read it, I thought, okay, here's Dante's Inferno now going on in heaven. I mean, that was my first reaction. But when I mentioned it to a friend of mine who also read it, she said, well, I didn't get the impression that it was fixed, that it was just talking about this is where people were. So, but I said to her, well, I was just going to ask you because I've never experienced anything like that at all, consciously, that I was aware of. So I just thought I'd ask.
I would say that describes the outer court, inner court, holy of holies from a governmental legislative position of authority, not a relational position.
Okay.
And when Jesus talked about outer darkness, he wasn't talking about outer darkness in relation to eternal or spiritual realms. He was talking to the relation to the covenant here, that you would be outside of the blessings of the covenant. If you didn't embrace the new covenant, you'd be stuck in the old covenant, which was now obsolete. So you would not have the benefits of, therefore that was described as outer darkness. It was nothing to do with what would happen to people after they die. And it's just been interpreted that in the same way that Gehenna has been interpreted as hell and everything else. So really, yes, I think there is a definitely a process of maturity for everybody. And if there's no end to the increase of his government and peace, then that includes all the ages to come as well, and all the dimensions and everything else that will eventually be drawn back into coming into the government of God and actually in peace and wholeness. And so I know I'll need to talk to some people who've gone in there, I guess, to see what happened after they went there. Because let's say you're here, you're in relationship with God, and you're in a process of transformation, and you die. What happens to the process of transformation? Are you instantly transformed, or are you still going to go through the process? Mm-hmm. For me, everything I've seen about how God does things, it's relational. Therefore, an instant fix would not be relational and would not enable the person to go through the relational process that would enable them to embrace that transformation, mm-hmm. rather than just receiving it and it's automatic. And then that's not how I've experienced it. I don't know. I guess ultimately, if someone is fragmented when they're here and they go there, they're in a much better place of safety and security for that fragmented part to come into a relationship with Jesus and be reintegrated and made whole. Now, I think that here there is the fear, the danger, the trauma, and the things which have affected people that keep their parts fragmented. There, that wouldn't be there. They're in a perfect place of peace. They're in the place where they're in the atmosphere of God's presence. So I think that would certainly speed anything up.
Okay.
Because there would be no need to hide from God, but there's still maybe the process of having to deal with the things that are underlying associated with that. So God is still ministering healing to me in that realm. And I imagine he's still ministering healing to people who are in that realm. But I don't know exactly the process.
Okay. Okay. Just another little quickie, one little offshoot of our whole the whole classes that we did with the Sheriff's Department. We just recently found that one of the guys who was one of the presenters When we saw him, he was having problems with his left arm, and they believed that it was from an injury where he had picked something up. And they subsequently found out that what it was is that it was not an injury, but he has stage 4 brain cancer.
Oh,
And
right.
so this guy is a believer. So we have what's called Caring Bridge over here, where you can hook up with people. And so we have been able to hook up with he and his wife to just really speak into their lives, to encourage them, to pray for them. So I'm thankful that at least out of that class, I've now been made aware of someone who really needs divine intervention, and to start legislating on their behalf and really praying, because this guy is a believer, this family is a believer. So it's amazing. I look at that and I say, okay, Lord, here's an unusual offshoot of taking that class that I would have never expected and probably never would have known about, but here's an opportunity to help someone out who's going through a really rough time right now.
Awesome. Yeah, excellent. And I think God gives us these divine appointments when we get involved. This is why, we're called to be salt and light into the world in which we live, not just sort of be protected behind our fortresses within the four walls of our own homes or in life or in church. The church is supposed to have walls. We're supposed to be part of the community and influence in that in a positive way. And when we do, we'll find all these things, divine appointments and opportunities arise because we can suddenly see them. And I think we're more in tune with the heart of God that will unveil it, because I believe part of aligning heaven and earth is to bring earth into alignment with heaven, which means bringing a change to the affairs of the nature and the culture in which we live, to bring that culture under the atmosphere of heaven and see heaven begin to change culture so that all the families of the earth can ultimately be blessed, which means we shouldn't withdraw, we should engage, and I think that's the key. We should engage because we carry the light which can bring change and transformation.
Yeah, just the last thing is we had an opportunity to go hear Ravi Kandel speak this weekend, and I'd never heard of him before. He was in, I think, the movie Finger of God, and he's originally from India. But anyway, one of the guys he had there was a former pastor who wrote a book, and it's called The Tail Wagging the Dog, and it's about natural leadership in the church and supernatural leadership. And it is right in line with the whole everything. I mean, we're sitting there listening to him and said, this is like listening to Mike, talking about how something should be structured. And just one quick point that he made, and then I'll be quiet, was that he said, what we've had this thing where like the pastor gets the vision, he brings it, every year you start the whole thing. This is the vision. Here's where we're going to go. And he said, okay, does it work better that you have the pastor who you get one vision at the end of the year and one vision is accomplished? Or do you say to the people, you bring your vision, let's share what your individual visions are, and then let's work as a group to see these visions come to pass? So he said, is it better that you have one vision at the end of the year or 100 at the end of the year? And the whole thing it's about the pastor very much like you're shepherding the people, like, what's your vision? How can I help you? Do this. It's not about me. It's a really interesting he wrote a little book, and it's really interesting, but it was like listening to you. And now I'll be quiet.
Okay. All right. Great. Okay, Jacqueline, you've got your hand up there.
Oh, thank you so much.
Okay.
Hi, Mike. Just so you understand what the reference point for my question, I'm a newbie.
Okay.
I guess for better word, lack of words, apprentice of yours, whose spiritual, yeah, my spiritual senses, however, are of seeing and hearing in the spirit are not yet developed. So it's a little challenging for me at this point. I expect this all to change, but to really receive clear instruction from heaven. Yet I find myself in a position to really desiring to help a sick loved one. And I'm sure that there's others who experience this as well. In my case, it's a 98-year-old mother who suffers, a wonderful believer, but she now suffers from dementia and moments of extreme confusion or hallucinations, which produce trigger anxiety. And all of this despite repeated attempts to bring this before the throne of grace. I know you would know better ways to navigate something like this, but anyway, can you provide any guidance?
Ooh, I think although we're looking to develop our spiritual senses and to become more discerning of how God speaks to us and how we can engage, probably everyone, I believe, it should start from the place of peace. Use peace as the umpire to begin with, and don't step outside of peace. That
Mm-hmm.
will be the point to start with everything. You may not be necessary, but I believe you are probably hearing, and you do probably sense, and you probably are receiving from God. You may not be attributing that to God, but you're probably receiving it all the time. And I know in the journey, a lot of people get to this point, well, I can't really think. And then you say, well, what is your relationship with God like? And, it's like, and you find that God is speaking, that you are really, but you're not really seeing it the way, because it's not expressed in the same way I would express it, or, sharing, oh, seeing this and doing this in heaven. So don't sort of, don't think that you're a newbie in a sense. You have a relationship with God, and you need to pursue that and continue it. It will develop and grow as you just learn to give yourself the opportunity of listening and then tuning in and then engaging. So, just keep with that. It took me years, I wrap things up quite quickly in when I'm teaching it, but bottom line is it was years. It didn't happen overnight. And I know that can be quicker now, because I do believe we're in a season where God is really wanting us to hear his voice in a way more clearly, and therefore engage. When it comes to specific situations, like dealing with a person or a situation within our sphere, because essentially, you have authority within your sphere, and that's a family sphere, but there's a limit to what you can do in making something or someone engage. And when there's a sort of a disconnect in actually between the people because of dementia or that type of thing, obviously it's harder to communicate and to get cooperation in a process to help somebody. And I in a situation, and I've been involved in many situations like this, that what is the best for that person in reality rather than in wishful thinking. Now, in wishful thinking, the best would be that her mind was totally restored and she had the rest of her living days lucid and everything else. That's a healing, miraculous thing that can happen. It doesn't always happen, and therefore we've got to face reality as well as what we would like that reality to be. And I think the more we do come into sonship, the more we can begin to affect reality in a positive way. But there is going to be some limits to that depending on the people we're looking to engage with. It's much easier to create reality around our own lives that we're only responsible for, and therefore no one else has a part to play in it. When it comes to dealing with someone like that, I'm looking for, okay, God, what am I mandated to do in this? What is my role in this? It could be a supportive role. It could be engaging the courts of heaven. It could be making declarations and decrees to bring change into a situation. A number of times in those situations, I have felt the mandate to end someone's life. Not from I'm going to go and kill them or euthanasia, but that was what God really wanted. And that sometimes people hang on to life and are not really cooperating with what God is wanting to do. And so, and I've been through this recently. I mean, within a year or so, with my wife and her mother, and she had a progressive sort of dementia type thing, and it was like it got to a point where there were other complications, and it was like, okay, do you want us to pray for healing here? Or do you really want us to help her transition into another realm? And, there had been numerous things, but she wasn't really open for healing. It wasn't in her theology. She comes from a brethren background, believer, no problem with that, but she really, really believed in healing. So you asked to pray for healing. Really, it wasn't something that she was sort of particularly engaging with or would cooperate with. And it got to a point where, something happened. Then it was like, okay, what do we do now? And the whole family gathered around it. And obviously, my wife and myself, having more spiritual insight, were doing what we could do to facilitate what we believe was what God wanted. And but it wasn't happening as quick as I would have liked, because you don't want to see someone in a situation where they're suffering, or actually that their dignity is sort of being expressed, whatever. And I remember my daughter being in the room, and she said, Gran, you've been stubborn all your life. Now stop being stubborn and let God take you. And within a very quick, and she doesn't know anything really about deep spiritual things, but she believes, and actually within a very quick period of time, there was a very, very peaceful transition.
Wow.
And so sometimes you just have to really be at peace with what God is giving you some authorization to do, and don't make an assumption it's this or that, but just get to that place where I'm at peace with this now. Now in that process, you have to deal with letting people go. You have to deal with your own emotions. It's like my father-in-law, he also has quite advanced dementia. My wife had to let him go a number of years ago as that was progressing, because he was, she'd already lost her dad. That was her view. I've already lost my dad. Now he's physically still there, but emotionally as a dad, she's more like a parent to him now. But the roles reversed, because she dealt with the emotion of having go through, look, I am losing this. Now, ideally, we would love to see the person restored and made whole and everything else. But I also know that people who are believers, who have that dementia type or Alzheimer's type thing, may not on the surface be apparently engaging in anything, but their spirits are. Just because their soul realm isn't does not mean their spirit isn't. Now, I know for my father-in-law, if they ever play a hymn or a song, immediately he will start joining in with the song. His whole countenance will light up. And if you speak to him about spiritual things, his spirit is engaging, because something changes. Now, I believe that he is actually not dead and is not passed into that realm yet, because he's still got a role, and his spirit is still functioning in this realm, outworking something that he has a mandate to do. He may not be consciously aware of it, but I'm sure his spirit is active. And his spirit is still functioning in this realm, because he's not finished what he needs to do in this realm. So we have to sort of be sensitive to and what a situation is, and not read into it just in assumptions, but get a clear understanding. So I am in no way going to legislate for his life ending, because I believe that he is actually still serving the purpose of God in this generation, even though no one will be aware of it. There may come a point where that changes and he has finished serving the purpose of God, and actually he needs to transition and continue in service of the purpose of God in a different realm. But I think it's quite difficult, obviously, when our emotions are involved, and that we are moved with compassion, and we don't want to see the person suffer, or actually us suffer from watching them, because it's very difficult seeing someone sort of go downhill, but I believe if you just keep going back to God and just ask him for, what am I mandated to do in this situation? Is it a supportive role until she's finished her thing, or is it, okay, well, I'm going to still believe for healing and whatever, or actually, I need to actually let her go and help her sort of ascend to another level, really.
Thank you very much.
But it's not easy. I'm aware of that, with the situation in our family and things. But God is there. He's a God of comfort. And, you know, if we continue just to put our trust in him, he will give us a bit of clarity about what we need to do in every situation, really.
Thank you greatly for that answer.
Okay. All right. Okay. Who would like to ask anything now? Yeah. Okay.
Hi,
Ray. Hi.
hi, Ray here. I'd like to get a little bit more clarity on the thought of storehouse and the apostolic centers and the development of those. A little bit of background. I have a piece of property that's been a part of my family for the last, I would say, 15 years. Lost it, got it back. Father brought it. Then my father, it was supposed to be sold prior to his death. And 7 days before he died, the deal fell through. And I've been holding on to it, but struggling with it because it's a commercial property and just financially, it just hasn't been very easy. However, we had church there years ago, and I'm really not sure exactly what to do with the property. However, I've had dreams about it. I've had nightmares about it. But I want to know if, if this is part of the process of having this center where people can come in this area. There aren't any other ecclesias in this place that are as spiritually minded, I guess, as we are, and I don't mean me, but just doing the work of kingdom work. Yeah. So I've chose not to speak to any of my friends or anyone, but to get the wisdom that I've been trying to get, but I guess sometimes I'm so frustrated with it. It's not channeling into me. So is this part of the process of building it? It's like pretty much what should I do? But I don't want to ask what should I do.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I can't tell you what to do, and I wouldn't tell you what to do anyway, but God obviously can. But often God does that in a process way rather than just a statement. So he's using the situation to enable you to get to a point where perhaps something else can evolve. Now, there's two issues here. One is the property, and one is that property associated with a mandate for an ecclesia or a storehouse.
Exactly.
That's two different questions. So the first question would be, do you have a mandate with a blueprint to establish an ecclesia or a storehouse? Because that question is totally separate from whether you've got a building or not to do it in. That's what you need to hear, because it may or may not be associated with that building.
Okay.
If you don't have a mandate for a blueprint for an ecclesia physical location, then that building is a moot point, because bottom line is you don't have any authority to do that should you have the building. So first of all, is God giving you a mandate to establish something physical on earth as an ecclesia or a storehouse or an embassy, whatever you want to call it, that you will have a blueprint for? If you know that, then that's what you then begin to do spiritually, establishing it in heaven, start, getting a clarity of a blueprint, connecting with other people who are releasing a sound, drawing people together, all that's all part of the process. And we have a whole intensive about establishing on earth as it is in heaven, which can help in the practicalities as well as the spiritual things of that. If you do, then you've got to ask, is this in this physical location in this building? That then you can ask the question. If you are looking to answer the question the other way around, well, do you want us to keep this? Because then it's like the cart pulling the horse. Really, it's like you need to know what you're mandated to do. Then you can find out if it's supposed to be attached to this building or not. Okay. If it is, then you have to look at what's the strategy for developing that and using it. If it isn't, then you're at liberty to do whatever you want with it, But then you can ask God, is there anything you want me to do with this? Is there any other purpose for this? Is this attached to something rather than us meeting in this place? Does it have, because your blueprint will have spheres of government attached to it. So let's say one of your spheres of government is, I'm only looking at our spheres of government. I don't know, operating and helping those who are disadvantaged in the community. Okay, so we have a building that primarily is for actually outworking our blueprint, which is to provide day center services and housing services and rehabilitation services and all of those things, helping people who are homeless and addictions and whatever. So we have a building that we meet in, but we also, the primary purpose of the building, we could meet anywhere else. We could meet in houses, we could do everything else. But actually, we can't do what we're doing here somewhere else. So that's why we've got the building, because it's there as part of our blueprint. Now, if your blueprint had, I don't know, let's say your blueprint had, media production and services, so you were going to have a TV studio and you were going to have this and you were going to have that and you're going to do that. Well, that's an outworking of part of the blueprint that can be done in a building, which is going to enable you to outwork what the blueprint is. You may never meet in it as here's our church meeting that we have, whatever that gathering is, but you may well be outworking the authority you have to do that. So again, we have part of our blueprint is media production and apostolic resources and all of those things, which we do in the building, because I obviously record everything in the building and mostly, right. So we're using that to outwork our thing, but actually we could do that somewhere else if we needed to. But all of these things for us help us do it together, and we're all seeing this is part of the same thing. So ultimately, the blueprint will determine whether you need a building or not. Because if God calls you to meet in homes and to form a more relational gathering that's that way, you won't need a building. But if you have a part of your blueprint which very clearly needs a physical location to deliver something, you will. So the blueprint will really determine what you need to fulfill that blueprint. And that might be a building, and that might be that building, or it might be a building and it isn't that building. And that's then when you've got a clarity of what you need, you can then go to God and say, is it this? Rather than I've got this, what should I be doing with it? It's like engaging what God's heart is, then you'll sort of have more of a clarity, I think, in terms of what you should be doing with that actual building. And, there's always, like you say, well, we met there as a church years ago, or whatever. That might be nostalgia, or it might be that the well is still there to be reopened and life come out of it. Only you engaging with God or with others who have the same vision, who feel called to establish a blueprint, can decide that by engaging God and asking him for clarity about it. But I wouldn't mix the two. Until you've got a clarity of one, which is more importantly, what have I got a mandate to do? Okay. If you're associating it with storehouse, ecclesia, I think, is God associating it with that? And that's will come with you having a deeper understanding of, well, this is what God wants me to do. I'm accepting that. Then I can ask him, do you want me to do it here or not?
So do I need to go to the courts to cut the ties first? Because there's a lot of
if you felt that was something that you led to do, yeah, you can do that. You can ask God to do things like that. There is no right or wrong answer to how you facilitate getting to that point. But you may just say, I'm going to lay this down on the altar. Burn up what you don't want. And, there's so many ways of doing things. Okay. There isn't just a formula to it. Okay. It's like, okay, I'm laying this building down and I'm going to allow you to purify and refine whatever's there so that I'm more clear about what this is. Okay. And if that happens, then you might feel, oh, I don't have any attachment to it anymore. I'll just get rid of it. Or you may feel, oh, actually, I really do feel that there is something, a spiritual deposit that God wants to re-envision. Only you will know that. But sometimes, as you say, it's quite difficult when you're attached to something emotionally, or there's history or memory, that then it's not as clear. So for me, in those situations, I just go and say, okay, God, I am laying this before you. Consume what isn't of you, and whatever is left, let there be some, gold, silver, and precious stones in this, rather than wood, hay, and straw, which may come out of me doing it in my own strength, because I think this is something that I want to respect the legacy of the past, or and we can have those emotions that stir us, but generally, if your heart is open, you go before God and say, hey, I'm laying it before you. Okay. Show me what you want me to do. But sever me from this. And you can do a court case and say, are there any accusations which are the enemy is using, or legal rights the enemy is tying me to this building? And it could have been someone made declarations in the past that this was always going to be used for God's purposes. And you may be affected by those decrees and declarations, which then, if they are God's, then he will rebirth that. If they aren't, then you can be cut free from them, because you don't want to be tied to someone else's declaration that they may have made for the best possible reasons, but may not be. Some buildings have covenants on them that you can't use them for any other purposes, because someone decided that was going to be the case. Now, then God says, I want you to use it for this. And you thought, oh, we can't do it. That's a problem. Okay, well, we're going to have to solve that problem then. So, yeah, I think, God will show you. And
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone else want to throw a question in, or share something, talk about something?
Hey, Mike.
Hi.
I'm in my car, so it's kind of awkward using a mobile device for me.
That's okay.
But anyway, what is your experience, or what are your thoughts regarding these manifestations that people get in their services, like gemstones or feathers or just different types of tangible items?
Yeah. I have no issue with God doing something in a physical way to get our attention, or to open up possibilities, or to expand our beliefs of what is possible in the supernatural. No issue with any of that. I think genuinely some of those things are clearly God. I do believe the problem lies in us seeking for that sign, and I want a gemstone, or I'm going to the meeting to get a gemstone, or I'm going to go to the meeting to see I want a feather, And the reality is that leaves God out of the equation, and looking for the manifestation rather than the God who does it. So yes, when those things happen, oh great, God's moving there, I want to go and engage him. That's a totally different attitude to I want to go and get one of those stones or whatever. Now, I know some of it can be manipulated, and I have heard stories of people who actually place stones, or it was not actually a physical manifestation from heaven. It was some sort of thing to attract people. Now, I'm not saying that happens a lot, but I do believe it can happen. You have the thing about the oil coming out of the Bible, and then it's like, but people are going to see the oil. Well, that really for me is like, well, why would you go and want to see oil? Why not go and engage God, who's doing some miraculous thing, and you engage him and see what he wants to do with you miraculously? So I'm not knocking the fact that God has done that, because I do believe he has, and I do believe feathers sometimes are manifestations of angelic engagement, and no problem with that. Would I be seeking for it personally? No, because I don't need it. I don't really need a sign when I'm already followed the signs that I've had in my own life, and I'm at the destination where I am. So I'm not particularly, I'm not legislating for those things in my meetings or when I do conferences. I think it could be a distraction that I would rather not have, because I don't want to have the focus on me in any way. If it happens, okay, it will be God's doing rather than mine. And I have had oil pour out of my hands, and I have had gold dust and all that stuff. And actually I just felt, do I really, what am I supposed to do with this? you know, because I'm not really very oily sort of, you know, particularly perfumey sort of guy. So it's just like, ooh, this is really smelly. You know, can I wipe it on somebody or get rid of it? And it kept just coming. The more I gave it away, the more it came. And it was just like, God, you're having a laugh, you know, because he was, you know, he was just testing me to a degree of whether I would do what he said. But I did feel uncomfortable with it because it's just not really, you know, I don't, you know, I'm not really into wearing smelly stuff myself. But you know, he had a laugh, but it was part of a thing at the time where there were signs that were actually, for me, opening up a different view to the supernatural, which is potentially what led me then to engaging heaven, because I was more open to that. You know, and I've no issue with any of that at all. The sad thing comes when people are still doing the same things 10 years later, looking for the same things, and they've not moved to where that sign is pointing. You know, it's the same thing with Toronto and the outpouring of the Spirit there and the laughter and everything else. You know, I experienced all that. We had that, in fact, the year before Toronto with us, where I was then. And actually, it was some of the manifestations that birthed where we are now. But we didn't just want more of the manifestations. We wanted what God wanted, which was to engage him in more intimacy, which would enable him to listen to him and then proceed. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing our ministry into the poor and homelessness and addictions, because we would have still been running revival meetings and spiritual manifestation meetings 20 odd years later, you know, and that wasn't what God was wanting. He wanted to demonstrate something of his supernatural power that would then cause us to continue to pursue him. And it got to a point actually where we had so much manifestations and so much deliverance going on and so much wild stuff that I went to a conference once on worship, a Wimber conference on worship. And I got out of the situation and God was able to speak to me, and he said, do you know that the enemy is using all these manifestations to draw people's attention away from worshiping me? You know, so I said, well, what do you want me to do with that? He said, well, you'll find that those that the enemy is using as distractions, which he does, he uses time-wasting spirits and he uses people's emotional needs for attention. You know, he uses all that because we're all a mixture. And when we then said, okay, look, when we come to worship God, we're not wanting to put any limitations on what God does, but if there are manifestations that require deliverance, we will take you in another room and deal with it. And other people can get on with focusing on God. Well, within a few weeks, most of the manifestations stopped. Now, it didn't mean that people weren't getting deliverance at other times. It just meant that a lot of what was going on was a mixture of people's emotions and the need for the center of attention and all that stuff that suddenly got exposed and therefore ended, you know. And then people started focusing on God. It didn't mean that we weren't having manifestations of God's presence and the power of God touching people and people getting healed and all that. It's just the distraction that was more interested in the enemy than God was removed, you know. And, you know, I just believe that what God is doing with a sign or a wonder is very clearly a pointing thing. You've seen this, now look to me. Or I wonder what this is all about. Well, that draws people back to engaging God about it rather than just more of the same, looking for the manifestation rather than the source. And yeah, we all have a habit of it, you know, because it's sort of human nature, I guess. But bottom line is God wants us to go beyond that to engage him. You know, so every manifestation has a purpose behind it, and that purpose is for us to engage God in a more intimate way, not to focus on the manifestation itself. You know? And so, you know, I've never had a gemstone or anything like that. Wouldn't know really what to do with one if I had one. You know, I'm not into wearing rings particularly, so I wouldn't be making one into a ring and wearing it unless God told me to. You know, I certainly wouldn't do it as an earring or something. So bottom line is it would be wasted on me. Now, someone else might actually, who's into that stuff or into the blingy stuff, hey, God might just bless them with something that, hey, they have a, that's fine. But, so it's less likely to happen to me unless God's sometimes having fun with me, you know, because I don't seek it and I don't need it. Why do you need a sign when you're already looking at where the sign points? So for me, the face-to-face relationship with God is really what I'm really interested in. And I do really want God to draw people on in their journey. They don't get stuck in some of these things, because some of the needs we had for physical manifestations lessen when you have your own spiritual engagement with God. I don't need any of those things, because I meet God every day. It's not so I'm going to go to church because I'm going to meet God. Well, no, I'm going to go and meet with people because I can express relationship with them and share with each other what God is doing in our lives. It's a different sort of dynamic when you have your own personal relationship with God that aren't necessarily requiring those things to validate it. But I have had many experiences of many different things over the years, which are all part of my journey, but I don't hunger for those experiences. I just want more of God. I want deeper intimacy. I want to know him more. That's really what motivates me. So I'm not really, too bothered about manifestations in meetings. Also, I don't pray for people like that in meetings. I've prayed for people in the past for hours, prophesying over until there's no one left to prophesy over, going till 2:00 in the morning, because some mantle of prophecy came on me and I can do it, and I have done it. But as I started to engage in mentoring and encouraging people, I don't want the focus to be on me. Therefore, when I do conferences, I don't lay hands on people, because that is all about, well, I'm doing it. I want to equip people to engage God for themselves, not to have to depend on me laying hands on them to do something. No, I'm not knocking laying hands on the sick and seeing them recover or praying for people. If God told me to do it, I would. Not that long ago, someone came on a Sunday morning and it was like, oh, can you prophesy over me? So I'm like, do I have permission to do that? No. Okay, what do I have permission to do? Well, take them into heaven so I can speak to them. Okay, so I said, well, no, I don't. I'm not going to prophesy over you, but I am going to help you engage God so God can speak to you direct. Then the next time you need to hear him direct, you know where to go. And that's what I did. Let's step into heaven together. God wants to convey something to you. Let be open for what he is. That's really what I want to focus on, helping people engage for themselves, And I don't think it's easy to do that when you have a ministry focused from the front ministry where people are all coming to you. So recent times, I have used sound and I use crystal bowls to minister to a bigger setting. Then I didn't have to lay hands on them. And all I had to do was just facilitate the sound of heaven touching them, or the sound of healing touching them, or a frequency engaging them. It wasn't me going around laying hands on them. And you can do that in so much quicker time because you just do it for everybody. And then you just help everyone to engage whatever God wants to do with them, which makes it so much easier. I don't need to come up with 15 words of knowledge and 25 healing under gifts or whatever to minister to people. Because I honestly do believe that spiritual gifts are there to help show us what we should be doing ourselves, but in a different way, because I can minister healing, but I don't have to do it the way I used to do it. I can do those things, but I want to be clear, because that's not my primary function. My primary function is to help equip people to engage God. So, I'm not doing a lot of those things as I used to, but other people do. We do have a whole therapeutic way of engaging people, which has become more alternative, let's say, and does use oils and use sound and use light and use other things. Because I'm not against all that. I just probably don't need it so much in my own life. My wife uses oil. She does releasing toxic emotions using oils and different things. And, I go to bed sometimes, it's like, what's that smell? She puts some oil on her pillow or something, but it's not something particularly that I've ever needed or engaged in. But it works for her and it works for a lot of other people. And it's because there is frequency and there's intent in it, and that's all good. you know. Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else? Robin. Yep. Okay, you got your hand up there, Robin. Oh,
Sorry.
okay, that's okay. Yeah, go ahead. Oh.
Mentoring, you're just an incredible gift to the body. So I just want to thank you. I'm sure everybody here is thinking the same thing about that. I have a question regarding seeing light and angels and receiving the Lord's messages from them. And please bear with me as I try to formulate my question. This is kind of complicated. But over the years, I've had a number of angelic encounters of various types, including once seeing a very large rectangle of white light, kind of living light with, it was like an open-eyed vision, and there was a real purpose to that. I had almost been crushed by my vehicle. I could have been seriously injured or killed when my car rolled backwards on me and almost pushed me up against the side wall of the garage. So I saw this living light, open-eyed vision. And then also since childhood, I've seen at times light around people, halos around people. New Agers would call them auras. Now, saying that, sometimes the things that I have seen aren't really kind of clear. I mean, there's interference that becomes very confusing to me. For example, I'll be at church on Sunday, I'm looking out and I'm seeing, on occasion I'll see the halos again. But then there's interference from light in the room, and I'm always like, is this real? Is it not real? So I've had some of that confusion. But at times, like sometimes when I see these halos around people, I start to almost see the form of a human being in white light. So one of the questions that I have, could that be an angel? So that's part one. And do you have any, anything that you could say about that, or if you know anybody who's seen something like that?
Yeah. Yeah. Let me answer part one. So let me answer part one. When you're looking at auras, and you're looking at, and I can see auras, and I can, when I choose to, I'm looking really at the spiritual energy that they're giving off. And
yes,
sometimes that can be negative energy when it's coming out of anger, frustration from the soul. And that's often associated with more of a fragrance or a smell, a bad smell, which is connected to the light. And I sense that this is not very nice, But mostly when I'm seeing things from people, you're seeing the state of their soul and spirit that they're projecting. And you pick it up where different colors perhaps have different representations and things. And when I look at people that way, I don't do it a lot because it's none of my business in a lot of occasions, and I don't want to intrude, and I don't want to be distracted by looking at it all. But when I feel led to do it, I can see it. Now, the more we actually create our spirit expanding around our soul and body, the more white light that we give off. And the more we have a flow of the river of life through us, which is, energy, it's not water, it's energy, it is spiritual energy, the more those auras expand and become bigger and are easier to engage. Generally, when people start, most of what they're giving off is the energy that's coming from their soul, their heart, and this energy field that you see in terms of electromagnetic energy, which is usually color. When and it's of different colors, and some of those different colors, like blue color or yellow color or gold color or flame colors or whatever, can be an indication of the passion or the desire or the hunger that they're living in. And you can see that and feel it and sense it because they're drawing from you. You know, when people are hungry, they draw from you, from their spirit to your spirit. You know, spirit to spirit, heart to heart. You know, it's a cardiogenesis thing. You connect with people, they're hungry and they draw. And Jesus said, you know, I know energy has gone out of me, power has gone out of me because someone's drawn it out of me. So he was aware of it. And, you know, I whenever I engage with a group of people, you know, particularly in a physical setting, in a conference, I am sensitive to that and I am participating in it because I want people to draw from me. So I want people's spirit to engage with my spirit and inspire me what I need to talk about. So I am very open for that and want to participate in it. And I'm therefore sensitive to that. I do believe ultimately, if our spirit is expanding and we're then, you know, engaging our soul and our soul is flowing and our gateways are open and we have rivers of living water flowing from around us, we are creating an energy field of love, joy, peace that people can touch and feel and engage. And it may well be that some people can see it, and maybe some people will eventually see it like they saw Jesus radiating light in his transfiguration. That would freak a lot of people out right now if that was the norm. I suppose people get used to it. But, you know, if you wandered around like, you know, with a glowing halo, I guess it would cause quite a bit of questioning. But in reality, we need to be doing that irrespective of whether people can physically see it. We want to be spiritually sensitive to people so people can actually engage it spiritually. I don't believe that's an angel. An angel does not live in us or surround us. It's usually with us or behind us, there in a guardian sense. Angels do not want to draw our attention to them other than if they're sent with a message. If they're sent with a message, then they usually get our attention to present the message, like Gabriel coming to, you know, Mary or Daniel or whatever. There are obviously occasions where angels come and they have a very distinct thing.
Let me just ask one thing.
Yeah.
Because sometimes what we'll see is like the aura, and then almost behind it, it's almost like another figure, if that's clear. You know, and kind of white light.
Probably be an angel. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was trying
Obviously, when I first started seeing these things, I started to see angels before I saw auras, because that was what I became sensitive to, and I became sensitive to my own angels and therefore other people's. So I could see angels behind them. And when you do see an aura, then it can obscure the angel, but you can tune into it. You know, I mean, I used to talk about that quite a lot, but I don't really now because I don't want to focus on me telling people what their angels look like, because I'd rather introduce people to their angels and let them engage their angels and find out what the angels are like and how they engage them, rather than me telling people. But I can do it, you know, and I can do it right now if I wanted to and see the things that are behind you and around you, which are interesting. And sometimes it is interesting and it's fun, but you all want me to tell you what it is, you know. I'm not going to. So, and again, so it's a bit of a pointless thing unless God says to do it. You know, if God wants me to say, hey, you got an angel there and that angel's there because of this, you know, he'll tell me and I'll feel that I have a mandate to do that. Generally speaking, I won't presume on that anymore in that way. So, you know, rectangles of light, it's an interesting one because obviously angelic beings are not all feathered humanoid looking beings. There are some angelic beings which are purely non-humanoid and sometimes almost like, you know, for instance, you know, golden pillars or pillars of fire, pillars of cloud, fiery swords, golden ladders, you know, fiery whirlwinds. All of those are equally living beings, but they don't look like what we normally see as angels. So again, being sensitive to what you're seeing and knowing that they're living, there's something of the life of God that they carry.
Yeah.
That's really what tunes you into that this is an angelic being. I
Yeah,
know.
that one was, for me, that was like an incredibly clear thing, which had just followed, you know, that near accident, and then a
Yeah.
big whirlwind, a blast over my head.
Yeah.
So it was just like this incredibly powerful, you know, experience. But, you know, even with some of these angelic encounters that I've had, there's just hardly ever have I received like a verbal message. So I'm just like, wondering, what do I do with that? How do
in
I'd like
reality,
to receive
most
whatever.
messages aren't verbal. They're spiritual conveyance of something which you will engage, but you may not have then the full revelation of, because most of those things are cause you to pursue God.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, an angel comes. He didn't say anything, but I sensed the presence of an angel. Father, did you send that angel? And were you trying to show me something?
Right.
That creates the dependence to continually get from God, rather than just assuming that nothing happened or assuming that I couldn't have heard. Sometimes, and a majority of times, my engagement with the angelic realm is not on a verbal basis, but it's more of an impartation of a spiritual something that will connect me or draw me. And, you know, my engagement with the seven spirits of God mostly has not been verbal. Although the initial encounters were verbal, then it's been much more of they're around me and they're empowering me and they're revealing stuff to me that is part of what I'm sharing with you, in effect, in a sense, because it's all coming from, you know, a flow from coming out of another realm, but I'm not hearing anything. You know, I'm not having a whisper in my ear of one of the seven spirits of God saying, oh yeah, talk about this to them. But when I'm answering a question, that often comes from a flow, which is not just God. It can be me in heaven, and therefore it's coming out of my spirit and what my spirit knows in that realm, which my soul may or may not know in this realm yet. So it flows. So whenever there's an occasion like that, I would just encourage you to take it back to God and say, okay, if I didn't receive anything physically that I heard or saw, did you want to convey something? Or actually, if I've received something, then I'm going to trust that will be released at the right time, or will be something that draws me, is a frequency that I'm now resonating with, that I will connect with that frequency when I hear it or see it in the spiritual realm, because there will be a connection made. And I do believe some of the impartation of things enables me to connect when I need to connect. And it isn't very often, it's not a cognitive thing that I know, but I instinctively am drawn to or connect to. Now, there are instances where your spirit is a light being, and your spirit is connected to creation and had a role in creation before you came here. And I have talked to people who have seen themselves as particular light shapes. Some of those shapes are the shapes that are associated with Metatron's cube or the tree of life shape, sacred geometric shapes. And they've seen themselves as that because they're seeing themselves at a different level of engagement. Often when I'm engaging in the realms of heaven, I'm operating from the connection to my soul that has the vestigial memory of what I look like here. Now, I don't look the same. I'm not the same in heaven because my physical body's here, but my spirit can take on that physical form. And when I get translated around the world or do stuff in other dimensions or time or space, my spirit can take on a physical form, which is, for me, is what I look like. I don't know what anyone else is seeing, but I'm seeing me as I have a physical form, because that's what I associate with me, if you like. But in the realms of heaven, I also have different roles that are not associated with my physical form here. Therefore, people see me differently in that realm. And sometimes when I'm connecting to something, I am seeing myself in a in a different way, like light, or initially when I saw myself in the light form, it was like an outline of a being light, but I couldn't see the physical shape or the features, but I knew it was me. Subsequently, I've also found myself connecting to spheres within Metatron's cube as a dimensional thing of spheres of authority or spheres of government or interactions between dimensions, and therefore I've felt connected to a particular shape. And now I know I've talking to someone the other day, and they saw themselves as a particular light shape, a geometric shape. And in probing what their experiences were, it felt like this was a progression for them, for their involvement in something at a deeper creational level than just the physical realm here. So I can see how that would be, and you may have then a different perception of yourself that's related to something which is beyond the physical sphere. Yeah.
Well, thanks. That kind of helps a bit. Yeah, to understand. I thought, maybe I was doing something wrong, not hearing.
No, not at all.
Messages. Yeah. Okay.
Well, a message
is
conveyed differently. Messages get conveyed in different ways. And sometimes a verbal message or a pictorial message, but sometimes just a connection or an impartation of something or an absorption of something, which then is at work in us. And, I have so many experiences that I don't really understand what they were about, but I eventually find out a lot of them. And it was just like, oh yeah, that's what that was about. Because I then connect what I had the experience to what I'm then doing, or what I'm talking about, or what I'm sharing, or my conversations with God. Sometimes it's just like he says something and I'm like, oh yeah, that triggers something, because that in me that you've just spoken triggered to an encounter I had, or something that happened to me that now it's making sense because now it's active. Because God does give us lots of forerunner experiences to then make sense later on in life as we pursue them. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay. Anyone else got anything they want to share or talk about? I want to give everyone an opportunity of asking anything if they want to. No? Sure. Jacqueline, okay, go on.
I feel a little guilty asking twice, but if someone else raises their hand, I'll stop, because they should take priority over me.
Go on, carry on.
Thank you. I heard a teaching recently about the 30, 60, and 100-fold. And one of the comments sort of jolted me, and that I don't want to be paranoid here, but it was the idea that those who are in the 30, 60, and 100-fold are sort of predetermined to be in that, and that there are those who may hear about sort of this Melchizedek order, new order coming in, and get excited about it and have mental assent to it, etc., and get pumped up about it, but they may not be called to be in the 100-fold.
Okay. Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
I don't agree with that at all. I think it harps back to Calvinistic predestination type things that almost creates a fatalistic thing that we are stuck. I do believe that we do have destiny, but our destiny is to be fruitful. And there's no 30, 60, 100-fold fruitful. It's just God blessed Adam and Eve and told them to be fruitful. And I believe the word blessing, which means empowerment to prosper and succeed at the highest level, applies to all of mankind. And God does not limit our ability to be fruitful to a lower level. we may hinder our ability to be fruitful by our own beliefs about ourselves, or by things that we may have done, or through hindrances that may have been. But God is always wanting to bring us into freedom and to increase our government and peace. And if there's no end to the increase, it would be totally contradictory to have someone that is limited to 30 when there's no end to the increase. Because that means that they couldn't increase beyond 30. Well, that doesn't mean there's no end. That means there is an end to increase. So I personally do not believe that. And I do believe that there's a danger in elitism in any of the we're the 10%. Because what I've also heard is actually that it should have been 30, 60, 90%, and the 10% are the order of Melchizedek and they're the elite. And I really do not believe that. I think God loves us equally the same. He values us equally the same. We may have different roles, but all of us can be 100% fruitful in that role. That's the thing. Every one of us can be 100%. Our roles may be different, but all of us has the capacity to be 100% fruitful in our role, not only be able to go. And there, because what does that make other people think? Oh, well, I'm lesser than them. If I can only ever be a 30, I'm lesser than them, because it's done in value. If you talk about different roles, you only have to be fruitful in the role that who you are. You don't have to be anybody else. This makes comparison with other people, and therefore it inevitably will make people feel lesser, and therefore God must have a lesser value on me because I can only ever be a 30 or a 60. That isn't what God is like. He is not like that at all. Therefore, I do not believe that teaching is correct. I'm not saying that we do not have different roles, and some of those roles may have different levels of responsibility, but none of that is based on value. Some of it can be based on purification and holiness because we've not yet matured, but all of us can mature to the highest level of sonship, which is for all of us to be mature sons in the relationship with the Father. So no, I don't believe that. There is a danger in elitism in all sorts of different ways. People start talking about ages. Recently, a lot of people are talking about, well, we're in the age of Zion, and we're the age, or you're in the church age still. And it's a derogatory way of talking about people. When we talked about earlier, I was talking about, yes, God is still calling people who still don't even know that they're really loved by him, and they don't really experience his love yet. And they're still in that place where he's still wooing them into a love relationship. And therefore their level of interaction with him is going to contribute to their own identity levels, but that's not because he's predestined them to that. And I know people will say, oh yeah, well, he predestined some people to be pots of clay and some people to be pots of iron and some people pots of gold, as if he puts a higher value on gold than he does on clay. He doesn't. We do. So we will look at a vessel and say that has more intrinsic value than the other. But if you ever seen Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, you'll know that when they were looking at the cup of Christ in terms of the cup of the covenant, the guy picked out the gold cup because that must be the most valuable one. And actually it was a carpenter's cup made of wood, because we associate value on the external things and God doesn't. So if he's made someone to be a vessel of iron or a vessel of wood, that has no less value to him. It's just that that's the role that they have. But we value people on how much bling they've got, on the externals, where God doesn't. Which is why when Samuel went to anoint David as king, he was looking at, well, where's the biggest guy? And is the father bringing, well, he's the biggest guy. He's the strongest. He's the fastest. He's this. And it's like, God was like, no. Okay, here's a man after my own heart. It's a little boy. Well, how can he be a king? But God isn't looking at the externals. So he's only looking at it from the perspective of who he made us to be. We value it, not him. So yes, there may be vessels that we are made because we have a different destiny to fulfill, but we're all equally valuable to him. and therefore there is no excuse for any elitism. And it is there. I was talking to Justin Abraham a while ago, and he had been in a particular situation with a big internationally known ministry, that their view was, because he was basically saying, hey, we can all go to heaven, we can all have these experiences, we're all sons. Yes. And they were like, oh no, you can't tell everyone they'll do that, that's only for the elite. And that was their view, because you have the thing of, well, using biblical things to make that so, like, well, we're part of the 144,000, because they'll use the completely twisting of what that means, because we're the elite and others aren't, and we're the special force. Now the danger comes in for the Joshua generation if we take on any form of elitism of being forerunners, because we're not forerunners because we've done anything to earn that or deserve it. It's just God has appointed us that because he has appointed us that. And why do we need to be forerunners? To point the way so other people can come, not to say, hey, we've gone first, so you need to listen to us more because we've gone first. That is a soulish way of looking at things, which I honestly believe is really the things that God will want to deal with. Because any elitism is going to mean some people are less than, through knowledge mostly and power. So I know how to operate in the kingdom of Zion, so I'm better than you because you're only operating in the kingdom of the church age, or you're in the kingdom age, or you're in this age. If we're using it like that, it shows a level of immaturity. And I would suggest that most people who are saying they're operating in the age of Zion with that attitude, not everyone does, I'm not saying, but some do, and I've heard it. It's like, they're really probably living in a fantasy rather than in a reality, because, we need to honor and respect and love one another for who God has made us to be. And whatever God's destiny is for us, we don't need to compare or compete with anybody else. We just have to be us, which is why it's so important to know our identity and our relationship with the Father, so we can just be at rest. Everything flows out of being and rest. So, for me, that's a key in that type of thing. And, I would, treat anyone who treats people differently or puts higher value on some people above another with skepticism, personally, because I just don't believe God has favorites. Well, he does, all of us. We're all his favorites, all equally favorite, all apples of his eye, all treasure of his heart, all of us. It's the fact that we don't know that which is the hindrance and the obstacle for us being who he actually called us to be. And of course, people in the world value people in different ways. And different cultural put different value on different people in different ways. But God does not value us in any other way than who we really are as actually his children. So, okay. All right.
So
okay.
much. I really needed that.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. I'm going to leave it there.